My name is Sebastian Holt. I am 38 years old and I work as a landscape photographer in Portland, Oregon. Not the commercial variety, not the kind that produces stock imagery for hotel lobbies or corporate calendars, though I have done both in leaner years and am grateful for the work they provided. What I do now, and have done for the past 6 years with enough consistency to call it a living, is documentary landscape work. Long projects in specific places. The coast of the Olympic Peninsula, the agricultural valleys of eastern Oregon during drought years, a 3-year study of the Columbia River Gorge across seasons that became a book published by a small press in Seattle and reviewed well enough that I did not have to apologize for it at dinner parties. I work alone, which suits me. I travel alone, which suits me less than I have been willing to admit. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Ladd's Addition neighborhood, the one with the rose gardens laid out in diagonal patterns that were designed in 1891, and that I have photographed in every available light condition over the 9 years I have lived here, because some subjects do not exhaust themselves. The second bedroom is a darkroom and an editing station and a filing system for negatives that my assistant Renata describes, charitably, as organized in a way that only makes sense to me. I was married once. Her name was Julia. We were together for 6 years and married for 3 of them, and the marriage ended not because of a failure of love, but because of a failure of presence, mine, specifically. I was good at being in a place and recording it with precision and care, and I was less good at being in a life and treating it with the same attention. Julia had told me this with characteristic directness in a conversation I have returned to many times since, not with guilt exactly, but with the particular retrospective clarity that arrives after enough time has passed to see a thing clearly. She had said that living with me was like living with someone who was always looking through a viewfinder, technically present, compositionally precise, but separated from the actual texture of being somewhere by a layer of glass and intention. She had not been wrong. I had known she was not wrong when she said it, and had not known what to do with that knowledge, which is perhaps the most honest summary of why the marriage ended. After Julia, I had reorganized my life around the work in a way that felt, for a long time, like discipline, and that I eventually understood was something closer to avoidance. The projects were real, and the photographs were good, and the solitude was genuine, but it had, at some point in the years since the divorce, stopped being the productive solitude of a person who knows what they need, and become instead the static solitude of a person who has stopped asking what they need because the question had become inconvenient. I was 38 years old, and I had not asked the question in longer than I could accurately remember when I found the diary on a bench in Ladd's Addition on a Thursday morning in April. I run in the mornings when I am in Portland and not in the field. The rose gardens in Ladd's Addition are quiet before 7, and the light on the diagonal paths in early April has a quality I have been trying to capture photographically for years without fully succeeding, which is one of the reasons I keep coming back. I run the outer perimeter first, then the inner paths, and I stop at the center garden for approximately 10 minutes because the bench there faces east, and the morning light comes through the rose canes at an angle that changes by the week as the season progresses, and I am, constitutionally, incapable of walking past good light without stopping. The bench was otherwise empty except for the notebook. It was a standard composition notebook, the black and white marbled cover, the kind available at any Fred Meyer or Target for $2, sitting on the far end of the bench with no bag beside it and no person nearby. I looked around the garden. The paths were empty in both directions. I sat on the near end of the bench and caught my breath and looked at the notebook for a moment. I want to be transparent about my reasoning because I have examined it since. I told myself I was going to open it to find identifying information, a name, an address, a phone number on the inside cover, the standard thing you look for when you find something that belongs to someone. That was true and also incomplete. The full truth is that there is something about a found notebook in a garden at 7 in the morning that is very difficult to sit next to without opening, and I'm a person who has spent his career paying attention to things other people walk past, and I opened it. The inside cover had no name, no address, no contact information of any kind. What it had in handwriting that was small and precise and slightly left-leaning was a date at the top of the first page, April 3rd, which was 4 days prior, and then an entry that began in the middle of a thought, the way journal entries begin when they are written for the self rather than for a reader. I read the first paragraph before I registered that I was reading it, the way you hear the first line of a song before you decide whether to keep listening. I will not reproduce what the entry said. It was private in the way that all genuine journals are private, not because the content was scandalous, but because it was unguarded, written in the specific register of a person speaking to themselves without performance. What I can say is that it was the entry of someone who was thinking carefully about something difficult in their life, and doing so with intelligence and a dry, precise wit that surprised me on the second sentence and again on the fourth. I turned to the last page of entries, and I stopped. At the bottom of every entry, not as a signature, not as a label, but as a kind of recurring notation like the coda of a musical phrase, was the same name. Sebastian. Not my full name. Just Sebastian. Written at the end of each entry the way you write a word that is both a question and an answer, the way you return to the same point on a map because you have not yet decided what it means. I sat on the bench in the April light for a long time. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because it matters to the story and because I am a person who values precision. What I felt was not the pleasurable shock of romantic coincidence, though that was present. What I felt, underneath that and more durably, was the particular disorientation of recognizing something about yourself in a stranger's private record, of understanding that someone whose name you do not know has been thinking about you with a consistency and a care that you have not perhaps been thinking about yourself. I did not know who she was. My name is not uncommon. The Sebastian on those pages might have been someone else entirely, might have been a name from this woman's past, might have nothing to do with the photographer who lived 11 minutes away and ran in these gardens on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. But the entries were dated from the first of the month, and they were clearly written about the present, and the garden was in my neighborhood, and the bench was the bench I sat on every morning I ran this route. I took the notebook home. I placed an ad on the Lads Edition neighborhood forum that afternoon. Next door, the neighborhood platform, which in this part of Portland is used primarily for lost pet notifications, complaints about parking, and the occasional community discussion that is either productive or aggressively not, stating that I had found a notebook in the center rose garden that morning, and that the owner could claim it by describing the cover. I received 4 responses over the following 2 days, 2 of which were from people who had lost notebooks in entirely different locations and different months, one of which was from a man who wanted to know if the notebook contained any financial information, and one of which arrived on Saturday morning and said, simply, black and white marbled cover. Left on the bench by the east entrance of the center garden on Thursday morning around 6:45. I can describe what's inside if that's needed. I wrote back that the cover description was sufficient and asked how she would like to retrieve it. She said she could come to wherever I was if I was local, or she could meet at the garden where it was found if I preferred neutral ground. The phrase neutral ground was interesting. It was the phrase of someone who had considered the social topology of the situation and was offering me the option that asked least of both of us. I appreciated it and said the garden was fine and suggested the following morning at 8. She was there before me. She was sitting on the same bench, on the near end this time, wearing a dark jacket and holding a cup of coffee from the Stumptown on Division Street in both hands. She was perhaps 35, with the kind of stillness that is not passivity, but the cultivated quiet of someone who has learned to be comfortable inside their own attention. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she was looking at the rose canes with the expression of someone who finds things genuinely interesting rather than someone performing interest. She looked up when I came through the east entrance. I had the notebook in my jacket pocket. I approached the bench, and she stood up, and there was the small social negotiation of 2 strangers meeting for the first time in circumstances that were unusual enough that the normal scripts did not quite apply. "Sebastian Holt," I said. She looked at me for a moment, not blankly, with a specific quality of recognition that was not surprise, but was something more complicated than familiarity. "You opened it," she said, not an accusation, a statement delivered in a neutral register that was nonetheless clearly waiting for an answer. "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry. I was looking for contact information and I read enough to understand it was private. I should have stopped sooner." She sat back down. He did not look devastated by this information. She looked like someone running a rapid internal calculation. "How much did you read?" she said. I sat on the far end of the bench. "The first entry completely," I said. "I turned to the last entry and I paused. I saw the name at the bottom." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. A long pause, the kind that is not empty but full of something being decided. "And you live in the neighborhood," she said. 11 minutes that direction," I said. "And your name is Sebastian," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at the rose canes for a moment. When she looked back at me, her expression had the particular quality of a person who has prepared for several possible versions of a situation and is finding that the actual version does not match any of them. My name is Clara Voss, she said. She was a librarian. Not the administrative variety. She was a research librarian at the Multnomah County Central Library on SW 10th, the beautiful Carnegie Building downtown, and her specific domain was the Pacific Northwest Collection, which housed historical maps, photographs, diaries, and documents related to the region's history. She had held the position for 4 years and described it with the quiet passion of someone who had found the precise intersection of their skills and their interests, and had been sensible enough to stay there. She had lived in Ladd's Addition for 2 years, in a ground-floor apartment on the southeast corner of the neighborhood. She ran the Rose Gardens on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. We had, she said with the measured delivery that I was coming to understand was her baseline register, been running the same route at approximately the same time for at least 18 months without crossing paths, which she attributed to the fact that she took the outer perimeter clockwise, and I, as she had apparently noted, took it counterclockwise. I did not ask how she knew which direction I ran. I filed it. We talked for an hour on that bench on that Sunday morning. Not about the notebook, not yet, not directly, but around it, the way you walk around a structure to understand its dimensions before you approach the entrance. She was precise in her speech, the way people are precise when they think carefully before speaking rather than speaking and thinking simultaneously. She asked questions rather than filling silence with narrative, which I respected as a form of genuine curiosity, and the questions she asked were specific rather than polite. Not what kind of photography do you do, but what made you stay with a 3-year project in one location rather than moving when you had what you needed. I told her that some subjects required duration to understand. That the first year of the Columbia River Gorge project I had been photographing landscape, and by the 3rd year I had been photographing time, and the difference between those two things was only visible in retrospect, and only if you had stayed long enough to accumulate the evidence. She looked at the rose garden around us when I said that. That's what this place is for me, she said. I come here because it's the same every morning and different every morning simultaneously, and that combination is, she paused, choosing the word carefully, sustaining. Yes, I said, that's the right word. When she left, she took the notebook. At the gate of the east entrance, she looked back once, not with the elaborate significance of a film moment, with the simple directness of someone checking whether the information they had gathered was complete. I walked home through the April morning and understood that I had just had a conversation that I was going to be thinking about for a long time. I saw her the following Thursday on the outer perimeter path, coming toward me from the east while I was moving west, which was the inevitable consequence of running the same route in opposite directions. We both slowed. Thursday, she said. Tuesday and Thursday, I said. You. The same, she said. We stood on the path for a moment in the early morning with the rose canes on either side beginning their April growth and the light coming in low and specific from the east. I could go clockwise, I said. Or I could go counterclockwise, she said. Or we could go the same direction, I said. She looked at me for a moment with the assessing quality I was coming to understand was not wariness but precision, the expression of someone who wanted to be accurate before committing. All right, she said. We ran the perimeter together. She ran at a pace that matched mine without apparent effort, which told me she had been running longer than she had mentioned. She did not talk while running, which I appreciated because I do not talk while running, and the social pressure to do so has always seemed to me a reasonable argument against having running companions. When we finished at the center garden bench, we were both breathing at the normal rate of people who run regularly and do not perform their fitness. Same time Thursday, she said. Same time Thursday, I said. She went east. I went west. I ran the last 11 minutes home with the particular quality of thought that accompanies things that are not yet defined and therefore carry more possibility than things that are. The first month was the outer perimeter on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and gradually, coffee afterward at the Stumptown on Division, which became a standing arrangement so incrementally that neither of us could have named the morning it became official. We sat at the same corner table because the light was good, and because we had sat there the first time and the second time, and by the 3rd time it was simply the table. She talked about the Pacific Northwest collection with a specificity and enthusiasm that was not performed for my benefit, but was simply the natural expression of someone in full possession of why they loved what they loved. She was currently cataloging a collection of donated diaries from the early 20th century, women homesteaders in eastern Oregon, mostly, whose records had survived in attics and estate sales, and had arrived at the library in varying states of preservation. She spoke about these women with the particular tenderness of an archivist who understands that the work of preservation is an act of respect, that to maintain a record is to insist that the life it documents mattered and continues to matter. I told her about the drought project in the Willamette Valley, about driving the same road in April, in July, in October, watching the color leave the fields in increments that were invisible week to week and devastating in accumulated comparison. She asked whether I found that kind of sustained witnessing, the documentation of loss, difficult in a way that went beyond the professional. I said yes, honestly and without the deflection I usually applied to questions about the interior experience of the work. She received that honestly in return, did not apply comfort or redirect, simply noted it and moved to the next question, which was equally direct. She was not easy in the sense that she did not make things simpler than they were. She was precise and honest and held positions thoughtfully and changed them only in response to genuinely new information. She did not fill silences. She did not perform warmth, though she possessed it. I had seen it in the way she described the homesteader women, in the way she spoke about the library as an institution, in the quality of attention she brought to everything she decided was worth attending to. After 3 weeks, I understood that she was attending to me with the same quality of attention she brought to a historical document she had decided was significant. I did not know what to do with this, not because it was unwelcome, but because I was, as Julia had once observed, better at recording things than inhabiting them, and the thing unfolding between Clara Voss and me on Tuesday and Thursday mornings in the Rose Gardens of Ladd's Edition had a quality that I did not want to record. I wanted to be inside it. I was not entirely sure I remembered how. The wound revealed itself on a Tuesday morning in May, 6 weeks after the bench. We had been running and had stopped at the center garden as usual and had sat down, and the conversation had moved, as it sometimes did when the morning light was good, and the gardens were empty, and we had both been awake long enough to have our guards down, from the professional to the personal, in the natural way of two people who have been accumulating trust in small, consistent increments. She had been telling me about the diary collection, about one particular woman, a homesteader named Edith Calder, who had kept a daily record for 11 years from 1903 to 1914, and whose writing was, Clara said, the most precise and unsentimental account of a life she had ever read in her professional tenure. Edith Calder had written about the land and the work and the failures and the seasons and the deaths of animals and the deaths of neighbors and the slow grinding difficulty of the years with a clarity that was not cold, but was entirely without the softening that most people apply to their own records. She had written about her marriage with the same clarity. Her husband was named William. He appeared in the diary consistently, doing the work of the farm, and she had described him with specificity and without excessive tenderness, and with something that was clearly in the aggregate love, but a love so unperformed that it was almost invisible until you had read enough of the record to feel its weight. Clara went quiet when she finished describing Edith Calder. She looked at the bench wood for a moment. I think about her when I think about what I've been doing wrong, she said. I waited. Edith Calder wrote every day for 11 years, she said. She wrote honestly and without management. She included William in the record the way she included the weather, not as the main subject, but as a constant condition. A pause. I have been doing the opposite. I have been writing about people as the main subject and treating everything else, the work, the place, the actual substance of my life, as background. She looked at me. The notebook you found, I've been keeping that kind since I was 22. I use them to process things I can't say out loud. It's a useful habit and also, I think, a way of keeping the important things inside the notebook rather than inside the life. I looked at the rose canes. What things? A long pause. You know what I wrote at the bottom of each entry, she said. You told me you saw it. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I've been writing your name at the bottom of entries since February, she said. Not in a... She stopped, recalibrated. You run in this garden. I have seen you here on Tuesday and Thursday mornings since last fall. I know your work. I found a copy of the Gorge book in the library collection and read it twice. I have been, she chose the word carefully, attending to you from a distance in the way I attend to subjects I find significant. She looked at me directly. And I have been writing it in the notebook rather than doing anything about it because doing something about it requires the willingness to be inside the life rather than inside the record. The May morning was entirely still around us. Why? I said. Why the record rather than the life? She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. Because what is in the record cannot leave, she said. What is in the notebook stays exactly as I wrote it. It does not change its mind. It does not decide that I am, a pause, too much of a particular kind of person to be worth the continued attention. I sat with that. What kind of person? I said. She looked at me with a direct, unhurried gaze. Precise, she said. Contained, requiring a specific kind of engagement that not everyone finds natural. I have been told with varying degrees of kindness that I am difficult to be close to, that I hold things at a distance that should be closer, that I am better at understanding the record of a life than living one. A brief pause. These are not inaccurate assessments. Who made them? I said. She told me about a man named Elliot. They had been together for 2 years in her late 20s, and he had been warm and social and had wanted a life that expanded outward, more people, more noise, more of the particular energy of perpetual social connection. She had wanted depth over breadth. The incompatibility had been present from early, but had been managed through a mutual willingness not to examine it. And when it had finally surfaced in a specific and irrevocable way, Elliot had said, not cruelly, she emphasized, not with the intention to damage. That being with her felt like trying to have a conversation with someone standing behind a glass partition. That the glass was beautiful and the person behind it was clearly worth reaching, but that the reaching was exhausting in ways that he did not have the energy for indefinitely. She had not argued with this. She had filed it in the way she filed things, accurately and permanently, and had extracted from it the conclusion that she was a particular kind of person that required a particular kind of patience that was not reasonable to expect from most people, and had organized her subsequent life accordingly. She had kept her own company. She had kept her diaries. She had attended to other people's records for a living and had understood this. She said, as an appropriate exchange, she would preserve other people's lives in exchange for not fully inhabiting her own. And then I kept seeing you in the garden, she said, and I read the Gorge book, and I recognized something. She paused. Someone who understood that some subjects require duration, who had stayed with a single place for 3 years because the subject was worth the sustained attention. She looked at me with the specific quality of gaze I had come to know as her most honest expression. I wondered if you might apply the same. She stopped, chose again. I wondered if you might have the patience for something that did not reveal itself immediately. I looked at her for a long moment. I am going to tell you something, I said, and I need you to hear it as I mean it, which is honestly and not as a performance. She waited. My ex-wife told me I was always looking through a viewfinder, I said, that I was technically present and compositionally precise and separated from the actual texture of being somewhere by a layer of glass and intention. I paused. You just described Elliot's experience of you in almost identical terms, someone worth reaching behind glass. She looked at me. 2 people who have been told they observe better than they inhabit, I said, and who have both responded by inhabiting less rather than trying to learn otherwise. A long silence. The May morning moved around us, a bird somewhere in the rose canes, the distant sound of a car on the avenue. Yes, she said quietly. The name at the bottom of the entries, I said. Yes, you were keeping it in the record because the record was safe. Yes, Clara, I said. I have been running past this bench for 9 years. I have photographed this garden in every available light condition. I have been looking at things that are sustaining and precise and worth sustained attention and recording them and going home alone and calling that discipline. I paused. What if we both tried to be inside the thing instead of beside it? She looked at me for a long time. The direct, unhurried gaze, the precise intelligence behind it working, I could see through something complicated. I don't know how to do that without the partition, she said. I want to, I have wanted to, I don't know the method. I don't either, I said, but I know that the only way I've ever learned to see something clearly is by staying with it, duration, returning to it when it's difficult, not leaving when the light is bad. She was quiet for a moment. The notebook, she said. It was not an accident that I left it on this bench. I looked at her. I have left things on this bench before, she said steadily. Never something that mattered. I left the notebook and I went home and I spent 4 days wondering whether I had done something very useful or very foolish. Why this bench? I said. Why not just say something on the path? Because I did not know if you were the right Sebastian, she said. And because if you found it and the name meant nothing to you, I would never know, and the record would remain intact and nothing would be lost. She paused. And because if you did find it and the name did mean something and you came looking, then I would know that the partition might not be necessary. I sat with the full weight of that for a moment. The architecture of it, the risk embedded in its design, the particular courage of a person who had constructed a way of finding out whether something was possible without fully exposing themselves to the cost of finding out. It is a very librarian solution to an emotional problem, I said. The corner of her mouth moved. Yes, she said, I know. Clara, I said, yes. I came looking, I said. She looked at me with the full steadiness of the gaze she reserved for the things she had decided were worth her complete attention. I know, she said. The following months moved in the way of things that have been building longer than they have been acknowledged. We ran the same direction now, clockwise her direction, which she had offered and I had accepted because I had no strong preference, and she did, and that seemed like a reasonable starting principle. We sat at the corner table at Stumptown. We walked the gorge on a Saturday in June, she with a notebook, a different notebook, a darker blue, which she carried without apology, and I with a camera, and we moved through the same landscape at the same pace and did not require each other to be different from what we were. She was learning by degrees to be inside the thing. I was watching her do it with the same attention I brought to any subject worth sustained engagement, which was, she pointed out one evening, both the appropriate response and a structural irony given the conversation we had been having about viewfinders and glass partitions. I acknowledged the irony. She said she preferred being observed by someone who observed carefully to being observed by no one. I told her that the difference between recording something and inhabiting it was attention paid to what the thing required rather than what you required from it. That the Gorge project had changed in the third year because I had stopped asking what I needed from the river and started asking what the river was doing independently of my need to photograph it. She sat with this for a while and said she thought the equivalent for her was to stop treating the people in her life as subjects in a collection and start treating them as weather, constant conditions that she was inside rather than documents she was preserving. "I'm the weather in this scenario," I said. "You are the most consistent variable in my current record," she said, "which is the closest I come to the same statement." This was, in the register of Clara Voss, a declaration. I understood it as one. She stopped ending entries with my name written in isolation. I know this not because she told me, but because I saw the notebook on her kitchen table one evening, the blue one, and the most recent entry ended with a sentence rather than a single word, and the sentence had my name inside it rather than beneath it, embedded in the text of what was actually happening rather than written separately as the thing that could not yet be included in the main body of the record. I did not mention this. It was hers. But I understood what it meant. 8 months after the bench, she brought a collection to my attention that she had been processing in the Pacific Northwest Archive, a set of photographs, donated by an estate in eastern Oregon, taken by an amateur photographer in the 1920s across the same valley system I had documented during the drought project. She had found them in August and had spent 2 months cataloging and stabilizing them, and had then, she said with the measured delivery she applied to things that mattered to her, thought of me every day while handling them, and had not mentioned it until the cataloging was complete because she had wanted to be certain they were what she thought they were before she said so. She spread them on the archive table under the examination light, 12 photographs in varying states of preservation, and I stood beside her in the white-gloved quiet of the Pacific Northwest collection and looked at images of a valley I knew, its specific light, its specific geometry, taken a century before I had stood in the same places with the same intention and a different camera. They were extraordinary. Not merely as historical documents, but as photographs, composed with the instinct of someone who had looked at the land long enough to understand how it wished to be seen. I stood looking at them for a long time. "Who was the photographer?" I said. "A woman named Margaret Hale," she said. 31 years old in 1923. She farmed the valley with her husband for 12 years, no formal training. She left approximately 200 photographs, of which these 12 are the finest. A pause. She never published them. She never submitted them anywhere. She made them and kept them. I looked at a particular image, a late afternoon shot of a dry creek bed in what I recognized as late summer light, the grasses on the bank gone to seed, the shadows long and specific. It was the kind of photograph that required you to have been in that exact place at that exact time and to have understood precisely what was happening with the available light. The kind of photograph that required duration, years of being in one place until the place had taught you what it knew. "She stayed," I said. "She stayed," Clara said. We looked at Margaret Hale's photographs in the white quiet of the archive for a long time. At some point, without deliberation or announcement, Clara had taken my arm, not dramatically, simply shifted her weight and placed her hand in the crook of my elbow in the way of someone who has finally decided that the distance between themselves and the thing they are standing next to is no longer necessary or useful. I did not move. I did not make it a moment. I let it be a quiet thing, a simple thing, the kind of thing that does not require acknowledgement to be real. We stood there together in the archive light and looked at the photographs of a woman who had stayed in one valley for 12 years and learned to see it so completely that she had made 12 images that were still, a century later, exactly what they were. The story does not end with anything that would be recognizable from the outside as significant. It ends on a Thursday morning in October, 14 months after the bench, when the rose gardens in Ladd's Addition had gone to their autumn state. The canes stripped back, the beds prepared for winter, the particular lean beauty of a garden between its seasons. We ran the outer perimeter clockwise, as we always did, and stopped at the center bench, as we always did, and sat in the October light, which was low and specific and the color of old brass, and drank the coffee from the Stumptown cups she had started carrying for both of us on Thursdays because she left her apartment earlier than I left mine, and the cafe was on her route. She had the blue notebook in her jacket pocket. She took it out and made a brief note, 3 or 4 words, unhurried, the way she made notes when something was worth recording without ceremony, and returned it to her pocket. I had my camera, which I carried in the garden now because the autumn light in Ladd's Addition was doing something I had been trying to understand photographically for weeks and had not yet resolved. I raised it at one point and made a frame of the rose canes against the eastern light, and then lowered it. She looked at me. "Did you get it?" "Not yet," I said. "You'll stay until you do?" she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded, the small, certain nod of someone confirming something they already knew, and looked back at the garden. We sat in the October light and did not fill the silence with anything it did not require. I thought about the bench as it had been in April, the marbled notebook sitting on the far end in the morning, the name at the bottom of every entry kept inside the record because the record was safe. I thought about a woman who had constructed the precise conditions under which something could be found without fully admitting that she had left it to be found, and about what that had required of her, and about the particular courage embedded in that construction. Not the loud courage of declaration, but the quiet courage of leaving a door open and going home and waiting to see if anyone came through. I had come through. And on the other side, the geometry of everything had changed. Not dramatically. Not with the speed that dramatic change announces itself. Slowly, in the way of the things worth trusting, the way a river valley changes across 3 years of drought, incrementally and then all at once when you have the full record in front of you and can see the shape of what has been happening. The way a rose garden moves through autumn into winter and back into spring along a timeline that is longer than any single morning, but that you can feel in the aggregate if you have been sitting on the same bench long enough. Clara Voss was sitting beside me on the bench where I had found her notebook, in the garden where we had run in opposite directions for 18 months without meeting, and she was writing in her notebook without ceremony, and I was holding a camera I had not yet resolved, and neither of us was behind glass. We were both, finally, inside the thing. The right person is not always the one who arrives loudly. Sometimes they arrive on the far end of a bench, in a composition notebook, in handwriting that is small and precise and slightly left-leaning, with a name written at the bottom of every entry as both a question and an answer. The name of a person they have been attending to from a distance, keeping inside the record because the record was safe, waiting to see if the distance might be crossed. The right person is sometimes the one who has been running in the opposite direction on the same path for 18 months, separated not by distance but by direction, and who needs only one change of course to arrive at the same bench at the same time in the same light. You do not always have to declare the thing. Sometimes you can leave it on a bench and go home and wait. And sometimes, if the timing is right and the light is good and the other person is the kind of person who stops when they find something worth stopping for, someone will pick it up and come looking. And the record, from that morning forward, will no longer need to hold the name alone. It will hold the whole life, which is what it was always meant to do.